apologize for the disturbance, but it's time for you to wake up.
Good morning. Welcome to week 4, day 2. Today is Wednesday, May 20th. There are going to be several videos throughout this PowerPoint presentation today, including this beginning one, to walk you through what we're going to be doing today. So today we are jumping into the Victorian era. This is my favorite meme of Tony Stark. You may be majestic, but you'll never be as majestic as Tony Stark in a German uniform during the Victorian era. So some of you may try, but you will never be that majestic. All right, today our agenda. So we are watching the video right now of the Victorian era and kind of walking you through the PowerPoint. We are going to look at some information background on the Victorian era. You're going to do a little individual reading on your own. Then there's going to be another video where you get to listen to me read Widow at Windsor and England Lady. We're going to answer some comprehension questions, and then your exit slip is going to be doing some dramatic monologues or dialogues. So, to get us started with our objective, I can apply appropriate strategies to notice, annotate, connect, and respond to ideas in multiple reads of 2 poems to analyze elements of dramatic dialogue in The Widow at Windsor. Okay, for this particular one, you're due now. All you have to do is watch this video. Unfortunately, I cannot show it here, but go ahead and click on the video to watch after you finish watching this video. So I'm going to go through some background on the Victorian era. This is going to be quite a few slides, so please bear with me. But this just kind of walks you through the different different items that were going on during that time period. So we'll start off with the Industrial Revolution. This was made up of technological, scientific, and industrial innovations like mass production, steam engines, railways, sewing machines, gas and electric light, and the telegraph. That led to an enormous expansion of production, particularly through the factory system. So this is when we started getting a lot of factories. There were huge social costs: the dehumanization of work, child labor, pollution, the growth of cities where poverty, filth, and disease flourished. Child labor and poverty were also a feature of rural life, where farm work involved long hours, very low pay, and exposure to all weathers. And as you can see in this image here, there are small children working in a factory. Also, during this time was a huge population growth and migration. So between 1801 and 1871, the population of the UK doubled. Migration in both directions was a feature of Victorian life. Many Britons left the UK for North America or the colonies in search of a better life. The Irish poor formed a large number of these migrants, especially after the Irish potato famine in 1845. The Irish moved in large numbers to England and Scotland as well as abroad. Within the UK as a whole, people moved from the countryside into the new industrial cities to find work. Migrants from across the world also settled in Britain, notably Jews from Europe and Russia. We also had a lot of social reforms during this time. As a result of early campaigns by people such as Michael Sadler and the Earl of Shaftesbury, and reports by parliamentary commissions, legislation protecting child and adult workers began to be enacted. Important reforms included legislation on child labor, safety in mines and factories, public health, the end of slavery in the British Empire, and education. By 1880, education was compulsory or required for all children up to the age of 10. There was also prison reform and the establishment of the police. So a lot of the rules that we have now, for some of you who have jobs, if you are under the age of 18, you had to get a piece of paper signed saying that you were okay to work. So a lot of the rules and regulations that exist in our jobs today come from this time period. This was also the rise of the middle classes. So society was hierarchical, yet there was much social and geographical mobility. Self-made entrepreneurs used their new wealth to rise in society, building large houses, educating their children, and employing domestic servants. By the 1880s, 1.25 million people were employed in domestic service, more than any other work category. This was also the growth of democracy. The franchise was gradually extended to the working classes, until by 1918 there was universal suffrage for men. The fight for votes for women was in full swing, but it was not until 1930 that women achieved the same voting rights as men. This was also the time of expansion. Before the start of the 19th century, or 1800s, Britain had already lost her American empire and was acquiring another in India. Her accumulation of additional territory across the globe continued steadily. The Great Exhibition of 1851 displayed the wonders of both industry and empire. Tied up with the empire were Britain's trading dominance, naval and military strength, and competition for territory against other European nations. By the end of Victoria's reign, imperialists could boast that the sun never set upon the British Empire. The map to the left actually shows all of the areas that were under British control during this time. So as you can see, it's a pretty big chunk of places. And several of them are still under English rule. This was also the time of the idealization of the family. The ideal of family, respectable and loving, dominated the Victorian period. The cult of the home grew steadily, with Queen Victoria and her family providing a role model for the nation. Women were expected to stay at home and bring up the family, but the reality for many poor families was that women had to work, and many single middle-class women also had to work. And then finally, the growth of leisure pursuits. The 19th century, once again that's the 1800s, saw the beginning of mass leisure, seaside holidays, religious activities, the development of public parks, museums, libraries, spectator sports, theaters, and music halls. Okay, at this point, to learn just a little tiny bit more on your own, you're going to go and read this article. Please go ahead and finish this video first, and then you'll come back to read this article. But when you get to this point in the PowerPoint, this is where you'll go. Then on this slide, you're actually going to have another video that you're going to watch when you get there, and that's going to be me reading through the two poems. Then you're going to complete this on the exit slip, so the comprehension questions and dialect practice. And then today what we're going to be working with is dramatic dialogues or monologues. So we're looking at authors' choices. Structure, The Widow at Windsor, and From Lucy, England Lady are dramatic monologues, poems in which a distinct persona or fictional self created by the poet expresses his or her ideas about a topic to a silent listener. It is, in essence, a one-sided poetic conversation. So basically, the two authors are pretending to be a specific person and talking to someone who is not going to interact with them. That person's not going to say anything back. They're not going to have any sort of response. But the person speaking does have a very distinct persona. The form developed during the Victorian era, and author George Thornbury coined the term in 1857. Dramatic monologues rely on two main elements to develop key ideas and themes. Number one, a speaker who describes or discusses a situation, revealing clues to his or her character and using a distinctive tone. And then secondly, a silent listener, or one of whose responses are implied in some dramatic monologues, the speaker may refer to but not directly describe what the silent listener says or does. Using details the speaker does provide, the reader infers that the silent listener has reacted, gestured, asked a question, or otherwise responded. So if you think of something like William Shakespeare, when he says to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind, yada yada yada, when he's saying that, he's saying it to an empty room, but he's implying that there's somebody there listening to him, and he's basically asking the person, is it better to live or is it better to die? Is it better to go through all of this, or is it better to give it all up and commit suicide? So he's saying this to a completely empty room, but at the same time, he's saying it to someone, it's just they are silent, and he's weighing his options against the silent listener. That's the same thing with dramatic monologues. Okay, so this is going to be your exit slip. You're going to read two smaller poems, and you're going to answer a few questions about them. I'm going to take you to that right now. Okay, so you're going to start off up here at the top. So this is after you've read both the poems, after you've listened to them, you've read the web quest. You're going to answer these three questions. So, determine how the lines written in parentheses affect your understanding of the poem. And then, what does the speaker suggest about the costs of being a world power? So this one is actually a two-part question. You're answering How does the part in parentheses affect your understanding? Like, what does it tell you about the poem? And then, what does the speaker suggest about the cost of being a world power? So, yeah, it's great, you have all this power, but what is the downside of having that power? Number 2, what passages did you find important to the overall meaning? And I want you to share at least 2. It doesn't matter if they both come from the same poem or if they come from one or the other, but I do want you to share 2. So which ones, like which line or lines, seemed the most important to you when you were trying to figure out what it was talking about? And then finally, we're going to go over our essential question, which is, what does it mean to call a place home? So what have these poems taught you about the meaning of home? This one, I'm going to break it down just a little bit more. You have to do 7 sentences instead of 10 this time. A lot of you did 10 sentences last time, and I really appreciate it. Today, I'm only making you do 7. For the dramatic monologue practice, you're going to be doing this. So a dramatic monologue is a poem in which the speaker is a fictional creation of the poet. The poem is written in the first person, but the thoughts are those of a character who is separate from the poet. The poet expresses his ideas through his persona or fictional self. The persona reveals details about his or her character in the poem, along with the situation and tone of the poem. In addition to the persona, a dramatic monologue must have a silent listener. The reader can infer the listener's response from what the speaker says. So you'll read the poem, The Maid's Lament, and answer the questions. The poem goes down to here. You're going to answer what makes this poem a dramatic monologue, so you'll come back up here to your definition, and you'll figure out what makes it a dramatic monologue. What is the situation that's described? And then what are 3 questions by the silent listener might the speaker be responding to in the last 4 lines? So you'll come to these last 4 lines, and you'll figure out what is the silent listener responding to. And then you'll do the same thing for this poem and answer these three lines. Now notice this one is asking you about lines. If you look up here, each of the lines is numbered from in 5 number increments. So if we're looking at 12 to 16, we're going to go 10, 11, here's 12 through 16. Okay? So make sure that you're paying attention to that when you're answering these questions. All right, as always, if you have any additional questions, please let me know. I'll be available by email today, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.